So in today's video, we are going to understand control flow statements, what they are, and I'll explain them in simple words. These statements tell the code what to execute, when to execute, and how many times to execute. They are basically the brain of your program, which guides the direction in which the code will flow. Now, obviously, it's not like the code will just keep executing line by line without any logic. Real-life applications aren't that simple. We often need to check different conditions. Sometimes we want to execute a single line of code repeatedly, and sometimes we might want to skip a few lines of code. Control flow statements help us do all this. They are basically of three types: conditional statements, loop statements, and jump statements. Conditional statements decide which part of the code should execute based on certain conditions. For this, we use if and switch statements. Then come loop statements, which allow us to run the same code multiple times using different types of loops, like for, while, and for each. Finally, we have jump statements, which let the code jump from one part to another, using keywords like break, continue, and return. But in today's video, we'll only be focusing on conditional statements in detail. In game development, you often have to make decisions like whether an enemy is shooting the player. If yes, then reduce the player's health. Or let's say, while playing the game, your score crosses 100, you may want to unlock a new level. Or, if the jump button is pressed and the player is on the ground, then the player should jump. These are the types of conditions we often need to check before executing any action, and we use conditional statements for this. We have several conditional statements, like if, else if, nested if, and switch. So let's understand them one by one. The first one is the if statement. This is quite simple, and you can also see the syntax on your screen. It starts with if, and inside the parentheses, we write a condition. If the condition is true, then the code inside the block will execute. But if the condition is false, that block of code will be skipped. Let me explain with an example. Suppose we have a player's health, and we check if the player's health is less than 0. If that's true, then the player will die. And when we print it out and keep the player's health more than 0, the code doesn't execute. But as soon as we set the health to 0 or less, it prints player died. The next statement is if-else. This is used when you have two options and want to choose one. If the condition in the if block is true, that code will run. But if it's false, the else block will run instead. Let's take the same example. If the player's health is less than 0, the player dies. Otherwise, we can add an else block and write player alive there. Now, if we set the player's health to 0, the if block runs. If the health is more than 0, the else block runs. Next, we have the else-if ladder. Sometimes we have to check multiple conditions. In that case, we use the else-if ladder. You can also see the syntax on screen. First, we write if with a condition, then continue with multiple else-if blocks for other conditions, and finally an else block if none of the conditions are true. Let's understand it better with an example. Suppose we want to give rewards based on the player's score. If the score is more than 1,000, we give a gold medal. If the score is more than 750, we give a silver medal. If it's more than 500, we give a bronze medal. And if it's less than 500, we print a message. Practice more and earn medals again. So, if the score is more than 1,000, the first block runs. If we reduce the score to 800, the silver medal block runs. If we reduce it further to 600, the bronze medal block runs. And if it's less than 500, the final else block runs. Now, you understand how we use if when there's only one condition, if-else when there are two, and else if when there are multiple. But what if we want to check one condition inside another? That's when we use nested if statements. In a nested if, we check one condition inside another. For example, to open a chest in a game, first, you need to check if the player is near the chest, and then check if they have the key. If the player is near the chest, we then check if they have the key. If both conditions are true, only then can the chest be opened. So when we check one condition inside another, it's called a nested if statement. You've seen this example on screen too. However, there's one thing to keep in mind. If you have multiple conditions and you keep writing nested if blocks inside each other, it becomes messy. Instead, you can use the AND operator. You can write one condition, then then another condition, and so on. The AND operator will make sure that all conditions are true. If even one is false, the code won't execute. This approach is more readable and cleaner. The last statement is the switch statement. We use a switch when we have one variable and want to execute different code for different values of that variable. For example, if day equals 1, print Sunday. If day equals 2, print Monday. If day equals 3, print Tuesday. If no case matches, print invalid day. As you can see on screen, in the switch case block, we check the value of day. If it's 1, it prints Sunday. If it's 2, it prints Monday. If it's 3, it prints Tuesday. If none of the values match, it runs the default block and prints invalid day. Let's use the same example of the player's score. We can use a switch statement and write conditions based on score. If the score is greater than or equal to 1,000, print gold. If more than 750, print silver. If more than 500, print bronze. If none of the conditions match, print keep practicing and earn medals again. Earlier, switch statements only allowed direct value matching, but now in C#8 and above, we can also check conditions in switch cases. So in today's video, you've learned about all the different types of control flow statements. I've explained 5 different kinds of statements today. You can revise them again later, and in the future, we'll also use these in actual games, which will help you understand even better. But if you still have any doubts or want to ask something, feel free to let me know in the comments section.